Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to join us this morning in the New Technology Theatre. Whilst we're going to be talking about new technology here, I'm going to take us right back to some very old elements here, looking at psychology and speed. At UKFast, we have been, I guess you'd call it banging on about speed for over a decade now. Years and years ago, we did some experiments that showed that the faster you were, the higher you ranked in a Google search engine. Of course, being a small, enthusiastic business, we published our findings and had a legal letter from Google within about 5 minutes on our desk. Somehow, we managed to avoid that legal conflict and ended up collaborating with Google back in 2009, 2010 to really look at how speed makes such an enormous difference on the internet. But back then, we all started to accept that the faster you are, the more successful you are. But nobody ever asked the question, why? What is it about the human brain, about the way that we shop, the way that we make decisions that's based around speed? So I thought we'd do something a little bit different for the next 20 minutes and really look at that. Why do customers demand that element of speed? What is it inside them that's going on? So first of all, we need to go quite a few hundred years back to look at how technology and the industrial revolution has really changed our expectations as individuals. When Captain Cook, for instance, arrived in Australia, he sent word back to London. Tell London we can colonize this place. 8 months later, London discovered that we could colonize this place across the other side of the world. Now, it seems extraordinary now that it would take 8 months to get any kind of message anywhere. But that's what expectations were like back then. Almost exactly 200 years later, whilst man landed on the moon, it was beamed down to Earth at the same time, instantaneously letting us know that, that an incredible feat had been achieved. Since the 1960s, incredible feats really have been achieved. And actually, when you talk about software systems from the early 2000s now, people are using phrases like monolithic to describe those software systems. In actual fact, our expectations as individuals, because of technology, have grown in an extraordinary fashion. And one of those things is actually our level of patience. Now, in the UK, we might think we're still the most patient nation on the planet, but this is changing. The end of the Great British Queue is here. Some research was done by Adrian Furnham of University College London into queues, physical queues rather than queues on the internet, to discover that nowadays it's the power of 6. We will not stand in a queue for longer than 6 minutes. If we think it's going to take longer than that, we'll leave. If there are more than 6 people in that queue and we're at the back of it, we won't wait, we'll leave. And interestingly, if you're more than 6 inches from the person in front of you and crammed into a space, less than 6 inches, sorry, you will walk away. So we know that people are more impatient than they've ever been. There are some antidotes, actually, in a case like this, and they're quite interesting because they follow on to the ways we act on the internet as well. One of those was, if you could see that the cashier was good at their job, they were busy, they were getting people through, then you would stay in the queue and you could wait. And equally, the other one, interestingly, was, if there was a piece of music playing in the shop at the time that you liked, that would buy you about 3 minutes in that queue that you wouldn't even realize you were waiting for 3 minutes. So there are ways, offline and online, to create a sense of time passing more quickly. And that's quite important as we go on to a few other things. But it's important to recognize that this trend of being impatient is costing some businesses across the UK a total of £3.4 billion a year because they're simply not fast enough at dealing with us. However, impatience is not an unusual thing. Impatience is actually the natural trait that we have. Patience is something that over time as individuals, some of us have learned and some of us haven't. But 1/3 of us are actually particularly impatient. And this is triggered quite often by 2 things. Either time, nearly always time, and sometimes money. And effectively, realizing that a goal is going to cost you more time or more money to get there creates impatience and makes us upset. Hopefully, we don't all get as upset as this lady here as she's trying to get to work. Impatience, though, can be a terrible thing. You can really lose out. So impatience isn't rational, necessarily. Take the guy at the back of the first queue there. He's looking really frustrated at the lady at the front of the queue. There are only 5 people in that queue. He would normally wait, but she's looking for money. She's taking ages. He's going to drop his groceries. He's going to walk out. And he still needs to buy those groceries, but he's going to go somewhere else to buy those groceries. And ultimately, he's going to spend longer doing it, but he just couldn't wait in that moment. Therefore, the whole process is going to take him longer because of his inability to be patient. So it's a powerful tool. This chap here, Ron Wayne, there were 3 founders of Apple: Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ron Wayne. Ron couldn't stand how much Steve Jobs changed things all the time. He didn't have the patience to work with Steve Jobs, and he left. And he cashed his chips in, basically, for $800. Had he stayed with it, they would have been worth $35 billion. So his lack of patience cost him in a massive way. When you look at demographics and patience, you find on the internet that younger generations, around 26 years old, are most likely to complain about having a bad experience. However, they're not always the people that will do something about it. Aged about 36, much less tolerant about a poor experience. So it takes, as you get a bit older, you're accepting of experiences, but when you have a poor experience, you do something about it. 26-year-olds, and in fact, the research we're doing much, much younger, are very, very intolerant of a bad online experience, and the biggest reason for that is having to wait around. So, what's going on here? I think we should delve into the psychology. To look at the psychology, we actually have to go back to biology, and in order to understand biology in this sense, we need to think about chemistry, because there are hormones going through our body 24 hours a day, more than 50 different hormones at work at any particular time, helping us make the majority of the decisions we make. So we're all hormonal all of the time. It's official. And we make over 33,000 decisions every single day. But less than 1,000 of them are really conscious decisions that we're actually processing and realizing that we're making. So many of them are unconscious and are basically us reacting to the chemicals in our bodies. So we're going to look at a few of those chemicals. In particular, the biggest culprit here is dopamine. Many of you may have heard recently about dopamine. Dopamine is the reward molecule, the reward hormone. It leads to many, many things, including lactation, but we're not going to talk about that too much today. It's not quite as relevant as a few other things: movement, learning, attention, emotion. A lack of dopamine, importantly, means the brain becomes bored and it creates impatience. What dopamine does is it gets us on a path and it keeps us moving. These little hits of dopamine we get, can be enhanced in very particular ways. Take visuals, for instance, creating an idea, an image that we can get hold of. Martin Luther King was one of the geniuses in this area. To get people behind a cause, he would create a feeling, an image, an emotion, something that we could see that we wanted to hook onto, and it creates something in the body called a hyperfocus. It's a really exciting way to get us thinking about and staying with a journey. What it tells us is that you have to create an effective journey, a plan where people are getting satisfaction all the way along that journey. So let's translate that into a few things. On websites, to-do lists. Creating to-do lists is extremely effective, giving people ways to see that they've got stuff already in their basket, for instance, that they put in last time, that they've forgotten about. Things that help them to see, I can tick off something really quickly now, really, really important. The other aspect that most clever online retailers are doing is allowing the individual to create the lists themselves, to create that journey themselves, and therefore they're more invested in ticking those things off. A really good example of this is creating a winning streak, and I suppose the best example is advent calendars. So this was one of the most successful advent calendars last year, not surprisingly. A different bottle of gin for every single day of December. Makes a lot of sense. But what it does to the brain is it gives the brain a reason to keep on this trail and keep coming back with it. Every single day that you open the new one, you get a hit of dopamine within your body that makes you want to do it again. And it's created a contract. We all know with an advent calendar that you do one a day. In fact, doesn't it become exciting when you forget one, you can open two at the same time? That's your double hit of dopamine in one go that's working away in your body and making you stick with something. The problem is, dopamine is very addictive. It's the same hormone in our bodies that's generated by cocaine, nicotine, alcohol, gambling, and social media is becoming the new dopamine addiction. That opportunity, whether it's anything from your mobile phone that communicates with you, a text, an email, a like, a share, anything that feeds back to you that other people are giving you validation through your mobile phone nowadays is creating a huge something for me feeling, a surge of dopamine within your body. And what's happening is that as we get more and more dopamine over time, we need more and more dopamine over time. The excess becomes the new norm. And when you get less than that, you get negative feelings, you get frustration, and ultimately you get impatience. A lack of accomplishment because your Google result is taking too long to load. So you go back and you go to somewhere else. And ultimately, it's probably going to take you longer to get to the next page. But in fact, you've decided your first impression of where you were going is that it's not going to give you the dopamine hit. It's going to be disappointing. And you move on extremely quickly. It's why every waking minute, we have our phones with us. It's why probably for a lot of people in this room, the first thing we do in the morning is check our phone. The last thing we do at night is check our phone before we go into our unconscious state. So consciously, we're looking for these things all the time now. So I want to delve back into the brain and why these things work and why speed is so important. Now, the first thing to note is that our brain has developed over time, nowhere near as quickly as the industrial and technological revolutions. In fact, our brain has been quite similar for probably about 70,000 years. But way before that, we had a much smaller part of the brain that is the building block of our brain. And this part, the reptilian part of our brain, has particular characteristics and is making most of those decisions that we don't even realize we're making. They've already made the decision before we consciously think, yeah, we're going to click away. It's fast, but it's not very clever, so it doesn't rationalize. It's always in the present, and this is really important. It's always on as well. So it's always working, whether we know it or not. That decision that I just made to put my leg forward wasn't necessarily a conscious decision, but my body was just making me do that on this stage. So it's very unconscious. It's also, therefore, quite easy to work with, manipulate, and fool in some ways into feeling a different way. This part of your brain is your ego. Therefore, when you talk to a customer, talking about you, the individual, is literally the most important thing you can do because it's why personalization has become so successful. And this is the reason why, because this part of the brain responds immediately to being focused on and reacts immediately to being focused on. So you get attention by deliberately going out and engaging the individual in the things that they might be interested in, that might spark something in their brain. A few other aspects of this part of the brain, if you think about why this part of the brain's there, it's there for survival. That's why it's very present. That's why it's always on. That's why it happens without conscious thought, because it needs to. And therefore, it also has to spot things very easily. So contrast becomes really important. Things that are tangible and visible become really important and enhance and stimulate this part of the brain that keeps it active and keeps it working with you. Right back in the old days of survival, if you could make out the saber-toothed tiger from the forest, you were able to get away fast enough. And literally, that's why we like different elements of contrast, because over time, it's kept us alive. Another really important thing that translates to online here is that this part of the brain only ever remembers the beginning of a journey and the end of a journey. It remembers your getting onto your homepage, and it remembers your checkout, which is another reason why those two elements have to be as fast as possible. You have to engage people as quickly as possible, and then once they've decided they're going to buy on your site, you don't give them a moment to think about whether they could get it somewhere else cheaper. It has to check out as fast as possible. The one thing this part of the brain doesn't really do is create emotion necessarily, though. So for that journey in between, there are other things we can do. The building blocks of the brain mean that the limbic system, just above that, is where we really harbor lots of elements of emotion. And that's the next part of the brain that moves quickly. One bit of research that was really interesting about offline and online was about nostalgia. Creating a sense of nostalgia for an individual actually slows down their perception of how long things take. If you remember that cue earlier on and the 3-minute pop song that somebody loves, that 3 minutes doesn't seem like 3 minutes. That nostalgia brings that down. They did some research where they discovered that actually people thought when nostalgia was in their mind, they thought that the loading of the page took 5 seconds when it actually took 8 seconds. Also discovered that when nostalgia was in the purchase, they would be willing to take normal shipping rather than expedited shipping, which helps a lot of smaller retailers who can't necessarily afford to be getting something out in 24 hours. If you can create a sense that this product is going to make them feel a certain way, they will be happy to wait longer for it. This is because nostalgia and using emotion in that part of the brain increases a sense of self. It promotes a social connectivity, which makes it really good for business. Because let's not forget why we're here today. We're here to make money on the internet. And we love shopping because it fulfills a huge amount of different desires, especially with dopamine. 70,000 years ago, the reason dopamine was in our bodies was to help us to find the tree, climb the tree, get the berries, eat the berries, and survive. Nowadays, we don't have those kind of pressures. Most of us in the world don't have those kind of pressures, but we still have the cravings to satisfy that dopamine can help us with. And so much of that translates into shopping. And especially in some ways, big shopping purchases. Holidays, cars, clothing. These are the things that statistically are the hardest to wait for. The things that we really want, but then we have to wait a little bit longer for. So in some senses, particularly with clothes, that's why next day shipping, that's why buying a whole load of different things, choosing some, sending them back, has become so extraordinarily successful, is because we crave these items so much. They give us a bigger hit of dopamine. Holidays and cars, you can't necessarily pick up the next day. So you use things like nostalgia to make that happen. But there is a problem with dopamine. Our impatience has reached the kind of heights where dopamine is now undermining the ability to build relationships. The more we push and build a website that purely fuels that dopamine journey, the less we're actually creating the opportunity for long-term customers. The less we're actually trying to build a community that helps people to come back and buy again and again. And in fact, the younger generation is the most critical area to look at here. 14 to 21-year-olds need more dopamine in their bodies to function than older people do. Therefore, for that area, a lot of people think that this younger generation, they don't communicate in the same ways. They're different. They're always on their mobile phone. It's so different to other generations, and it's the younger people that are the issue. It's actually the mobile phones that are the issue. This is the first generation of that age that have always had a mobile phone. And therefore, those people who need dopamine the most can get it more than they ever could before. And it's creating a dangerous situation where loyalty and trust don't get built up by businesses like yourselves with individuals like them. So what can we do about it? And this is where a chemical cocktail needs to come in. There are other hormones that we can use in order to build up this sense of community. Serotonin and oxytocin are the main two of those. So let's have a quick look at both of those and how we can use them. So serotonin, it's a social chemical. It's known as the happy hormone. It influences mood and social behavior, and actually a lack of this hormone causes depression. It's no wonder that we're actually facing some areas of depression in 14 to in kind of teenagers now, because actually they're so focused on some hormones and not on others that are really important to them. It mediates the perception of how resourceful we can be, so how easily we can get something, whether there's a good chance that actually we can win that item or buy something. And therefore, it helps us to feel as though we're being encouraged onwards. The best ways to work with it on your website is to have fantastic information in that middle section. If we think about getting people on the website as fast as possible, that dopamine hit, during the time they're on the website, you have to make them feel valued. You have to make them feel as though they want to spend that time there. And appealing to serotonin within their bodies is a great way to do it. Chatbots, or people, or live chat on the website that actually can engage them, answer questions, make them, encourage them along that journey is actually proving really important. It's actually proving to bring out this chemical and help people slow down on a site, spend a bit more time making a considered choice rather than disappearing off to find something somewhere else. So serotonin is definitely something we should work on adding into the mix. The other one, very important but a double-edged sword, is oxytocin. Again, it's a social chemical. It's known as the love hormone. So it influences empathy, generosity, and orgasm. Again, we're going to stick with the first two of these, a little bit more important for this talk. But it underlies trust. So when you're trying to build a community and build trust online, this chemical in people's bodies is helping them to decide, do I want to be a part of this group? Do I want to be a part of this community? But equally, when they make that decision, this chemical gets attached to your brand, and it helps people to stay in your community. However, if they make the decision that it doesn't appeal to them, they aren't a part of your group, then this chemical will make them stay away from you as well. So you have to know what your target audience is, and you have to work on ways to develop that. One brand that's done this extraordinarily is an Australian brand, Sand and Sky. Very small business, realized that the best way they could grow their business was to grow a community and allow that community to take control of their R&D and their development. They do facial skincare products, and they decided the best thing they could do was get their community to test those products for them, tell them what works, what doesn't, send them out free samples, get the feedback, and have this all play out on social media, on Instagram, on YouTube, create channels. They went incredibly quickly to 50,000 Instagram followers, and those followers were self-generating. They're all telling their friends, come and try this product. They'll give you a free sample. They're now a worldwide company shipping out to all parts of the world because they've created their community by using this chemical in people's bodies, being listened to, being a part of the group, helping to shape their products has meant oxytocin is the main reason that they're successful as a business. So using serotonin and oxytocin, it subdues the desire to get somewhere quickly. It makes it worthwhile to spend more time and build a rounded customer experience. Let's try and take an example where all of this can come into the mix. Auction sites are a great example, and there's something else that plays a part here. It's called Pseudo Endowment. When you see something on an auction site, let's say you are a huge early rock and roll fan. You love Elvis, and suddenly the comb that he used in all his films is on an auction site. You could buy that. It's been signed years and years ago. Could be worth an amazing amount to you because you're a big fan. As soon as you see that up there, you already feel that you own it. This is pseudo endowment, feelings of possession before you actually own the item. So as bids start coming in, your idea of how much that item should be worth changes. You had an initial idea, but once other people start adding their ideas in, you become attached to it. The idea of being in this community that want to buy it gets the oxytocin going in your body, and the very nature of bids coming again and again, and let's face it, most bids happen in the last 10 minutes. The dopamine going through your body at that moment is incredible. The celebrity involvement means that it's making you feel happy to be involved in that. You're encouraged to be involved, so you've got serotonin going on as well. And this primitive part of your brain is loving the contrasts that are going on, the emotions that you're feeling, the idea of, am I going to win this, am I not? How disappointed will I feel if I don't? The excitement, the regret, all these triggers mean that you will pay much more for that item, or your final bid might be much more than you ever wanted to spend, and you might not win it. And afterwards you'll go, oh my God, I'm glad I didn't win that. I didn't want to spend that much money. You won't even realize what you've done. So many people end up buying something through the excitement of using this cocktail of chemicals. So on your websites, not everyone has an auction site, most people don't. But if you can create those same feelings, the feeling of possession of an item, the feeling of competition, lots of people do it by saying only 6 of these left now, or only 1 hour till, and you can get it by the next day. All of these things, desire, nostalgia, all of these create the effect that we're looking for. Effectively, what you're doing is neuromarketing. So you're looking at how to press the buy button in the brain. And there are lots of different ways to do this. We've talked about the reasons why to do it and a few of the ways, but effectively, to recap on a few of them, enjoyable beginning and end with a seamless middle. Seamless middle doesn't mean fast. It means making the person not realize how much time they're spending engrossing themselves with your products. Web design is really important. If we think about the ideas of contrast in the primitive brain, then contrasting colors, sights, sounds, they create dopamine, they hold that brain there. An interesting thing, though, about that brain and its impatience is there's a trend now, at the moment that somebody's about to buy something, to say, oh, you might also like this. Now, if that other thing is complementary, then should work okay. But if it's an alternative, then actually our brain gets confused at that point. And our brain thinks, well, hold on, I thought I was going to buy this. So, okay, well, I'll have a quick look at this. And then within minutes, you've lost them. And they're thinking, well, hold on, if I'm looking at this, I might as well go to this other website and look at this. So at that point, that you've got somebody, don't start complicating it with other things that they could buy in alternative to the thing that they've bought. You can try and help them and upsell them to buying things that are proven on your website to buy in complementary fashion to the item that they've chosen. And encourage the happy and love hormones as much as possible to hold that attention. So creating this from a UKFast perspective, we've gone away and done the research into the psychology. Ultimately, what we and other business on the internet can deliver to you is the ability to create that speed. And you can do it in lots of different ways. Here are 5 ways to create that speed. One of them is the network that you're on. People hate latency. People hate impatience. Make sure that your network, ask questions when you get onto a network. Whatever your platform is that you're on, find out where it's hosted in the background. Find out how that network works. Find out how big that network is. Find out how fast it is. Find out if it's going to help you rank more highly on Google because you're faster than your competitors. Compute power is really important. Find out if you know you're going to grow. Black Friday is a fantastic example of this. Some people will go into Black Friday with the same amount of resource they'd have on any other day, and they'll fall over. And they'll wonder, hold on, this is my biggest day. Why is my website not delivering at the same speed it normally does? Why can't people get onto my website? It's because you've created a traffic jam on your website. You created the ability to deal with only 5%, 10% of the people that actually want to be there. Make sure your compute power is always behind you in the way you need it to be in order to work with those customers that you're hoping to get. The code base is really important, and there's loads of information out there about creating a friction-free environment. I won't talk too much about that stuff because I think we're running out of time. Obviously, UI and UX are massively important, and I imagine that people in this room, if you're creating a user journey for people, you're really thinking about the right ways to do that and the different user journeys across your website to make sure that you're helping them to get to where they need to get to as quickly as possible. Finally, the other aspect to really think about is illusion. Creating the appearance of speed. One of the greatest examples of this was probably about a decade ago, actually, when Google first started learning about speed. The Google homepage, the search bar would load instantly, faster than anybody had ever seen any page load in the history of the internet. But it was just that one box and the line above it that had loaded immediately. Everything else came in afterwards, but our eyes didn't notice that. We saw the box in the middle, and we thought, wow, that's so fast. Create the illusions of speed. Sometimes you can deliver things on your web page faster than other things. One example here is don't put anything that has to draw down heavy machinery, as it were, to your web page on the home page, for instance. Make sure your home page is as lean as possible, loads as fast as possible. As people get into it, add other elements like video. Add other elements like animations or live chat and things like that. Bring them in after the main part of your website loads. And that's about it from me today. I hope that's explained a little bit about why people are so impatient, why it's important, why it's not going away, but also what we can do about it when we can't necessarily provide all of that speed. We might sell something where we need to really help people understand that product. Lots of different ways to do that through the stuff that we just talked about. Does anybody have any questions at all? I think we've got a couple of minutes. Yes? Oh, well, there's a lady just coming with a microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
What if, so our customers mainly don't land, they mainly don't land on the homepage, they mainly land on a product page because they've searched for that product and they land straight on the product page.
Yeah.
So that page is pretty fast, and then they get to the checkout and they abandon the checkout. We do the email marketing thing, but the reason why they abandon the checkout is because they need to sign up for a trade card if they're a new customer, and that process is quite long. So what advice would you give to, obviously you can have a digital trade card if you went to a store, but if you're online, people don't want to fill out loads of forms, etc.
I think that part of it comes down to how much you've built up the desire for that product in the first place. So absolutely, you have a challenge with a first-time customer if you haven't stored the data. If it isn't easy, the Amazon one-click patent came up, I think, a year and a half ago, and more people are now being able to speed up that journey for people when they do have the details. When they don't have the details, it can be more challenging. To go back to the very start of your question, all of those landing pages need to be as lean as possible. because they're the first impression. So if it's not your homepage that's the first impression, it's a landing page, then the same thing applies. And as they go through the site from that point, you have to build up that sense and build up this idea that they want to be a part of your community, that they can get a bigger answer than just that product from buying this element from you, in order, because there's a moment, isn't there, when you sign up as a new customer to have to fill out those details. Everybody has that moment of walking away or not. Go through the process of your main competitors and look at what they're doing. Obviously, some people do things like PayPal as an easier way to pay. If you don't want to do that and you have credit card ways to pay, then there are ways to use code in the background to autofill pieces of information. That's worth doing. The faster they can get through it and the least amount of information you need in order to take that payment, you should take.
Cool, thank you.
No problem, thank you. Any other questions at all? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.